The Great Hall of Covenant Prime was the largest structure ever built by any species in the known galaxy. Its walls stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed near the ceiling. 12 flags hung from golden poles, each one representing a species that had joined the United Stellar Congress. For 300 years, this hall had seen treaties signed, wars ended, and peace maintained. Today, it would see something no one expected. Admiral Una Park stood at the back of the human section, her gray uniform perfect, her face showing nothing. She was 58 years old. She had commanded fleets. She had won battles that saved entire worlds. She had buried friends on planets whose names most species could not pronounce. And now she stood in silence, watching politicians decide the fate of her people. Ambassador Doan Kang sat at the front table, his hands folded calmly. He was not a soldier like Una. He was a man of words, of patience, of careful thought. But today, even his patience was reaching its end. Beside him sat young Jiwoo Lee, barely 25, serving as his aide. Jiwoo still believed in the Congress. He still believed that words could change minds. Dohan remembered being that young once. The Velith High Chancellor rose from his seat. His species was tall and thin, with skin like pale blue glass. His voice echoed through the hall as the translation systems carried his words to every ear. "The matter before us today is simple," he said. "Humanity has grown too powerful. Their fleets outnumber ours combined. Their weapons are beyond our understanding. Their soldiers are trained for war from birth. They expand without end. They breed without limit. They are a threat to galactic stability." Una felt her jaw tighten. She said nothing. The Moran delegate rose next. His species was short and covered in thick brown fur. Their homeworld was cold and dark, and they had always been afraid of those who lived in the light. "We do not say humans are evil," the Moran said carefully. "We say they are dangerous. A knife is not evil, but a wise person keeps it locked away." Jiwoo whispered to Dawn, "How can they say this? After everything we did for them?" Dohan raised a hand slightly. Wait. The debate continued for hours. Species after species rose to speak. Some defended humanity. The Torith ambassador, a warrior species who respected strength, spoke of human honor. The small Fenari delegation talked about how human medicine had saved their dying world, that they were outnumbered. Finally, the vote came. The containment protocol would restrict human expansion to their current borders. Human military ships would not be allowed beyond those borders without Congress permission. Human weapons research would be monitored by a joint alien committee. Human colonies would accept alien inspectors. The vote was 9-3 against humanity. Silence fell over the hall. Every eye turned to the human section. Ambassador Dawn stood slowly. His movements were calm and measured. He pressed the button to request speaking time. "The chair recognizes the human delegation," the Congress speaker said. Dawn looked around the hall. He looked at the Velith, who feared human strength. He looked at the Moran, who wanted humans locked away. He looked at the empty seats of species who no longer existed because humans had died to save them. 200 years ago, Dawn began, his voice quiet but clear. The swarm came. You all remember the swarm. They ate worlds. They consumed entire species. They could not be reasoned with. They could not be stopped. He paused. You begged us for help. Every single one of you. The Velith sent their children to human space to hide. The Myran offered us everything they had if we would fight. And we did fight. We fought for 40 years. We lost 3 billion of our people. 3 billion fathers and mothers and children burned in the dark between stars. The hall was completely silent. When the void entities came, you called again. When the Keth marauders threatened your trade routes, you called again. When the plague of shadows swept through your medical stations, human doctors came to die alongside your sick. Every time you called. Every time we answered. Dohan reached up and touched the small translator pen on his collar. Every delegate wore one. It was the symbol of Congress membership. We never asked for payment. We never asked for territory. We never asked for power. We only asked for respect, for recognition that we bled for you, that we died for you. That we stood between you and the darkness while you slept safely in your beds. He removed the pen and placed it gently on the table. Today, you have given your answer. Ambassador Dong Kang turned and walked toward the exit. Behind him, Admiral Yuna Park fell into step. Then Ji Woo Lee. Then every human in the hall. 27 delegates. 15 military advisors. 32 support staff. They walked in perfect silence, their footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. Not one of them looked back. At the door, Daewon stopped. He turned his head slightly and spoke in Korean, knowing the translators would carry his words to every ear in the hall. We asked for nothing. We gave everything. Remember that. Then he was gone. They were all gone. The great doors closed behind them with a sound like thunder. For a long moment, no one in the hall moved. No one spoke. The flags hung limp and still. The empty human seats seemed to grow larger somehow, more noticeable, more wrong. The Velith High Chancellor looked at his aide. His face, usually so confident, had gone pale. "What happens now?" he whispered. His aide, a young Velith who had studied human history for decades, could not meet his eyes. "I do not know, Chancellor. In 300 years of galactic history, no species has ever walked out of this hall. No species has ever left the Congress." He swallowed hard. The humans built the systems that keep our trade routes safe. They patrol the borders that keep the pirates away. They maintain the warning networks that watch for threats from dark space. Surely they will continue those duties, the Chancellor said. They cannot simply abandon their responsibilities. Those were never their responsibilities, Chancellor. They were gifts, freely given. The aide finally looked up. And gifts can be taken back. Across the hall, the Torith ambassador stood. She was old, her scales gray with age, but her eyes were sharp. "You fools," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "You absolute fools. You have just told the only species willing to die for strangers that you consider them a threat. You have just told the warriors who saved all of you that you want them in chains." She gathered her documents and began to walk out. "Where are you going?" Someone called. "To contact my government. Someone needs to apologize before it is too late." But even as she walked toward the communications center, a message was already spreading across the galaxy. Human ships were turning around. Human patrols were heading home. Human borders were closing. The stars that humanity had protected for 2 centuries suddenly seemed much darker. And in the vast emptiness of space, something ancient and hungry began to stir. Something that had been waiting. Something that remembered how the humans had heard it long ago. The swarm had never forgotten. And now, with humanity retreating behind their walls, there was nothing standing in its way. 6 months passed like a slow wound bleeding. Captain Sujin Choi stood on the bridge of her patrol ship, the Haniel, and watched the stars through the main window. She had commanded this ship for 15 years. She knew every sound it made, every shake of its engines, every flicker of its lights. And now she was taking it home. Behind her, the alien station grew smaller and smaller. Station Keeper Morval, a Fenari with soft gray fur and sad eyes, had begged her to stay. He had held her hands in his small paws and promised anything if the Haniel would just continue its patrols. The pirates were already getting bold. Merchant ships were disappearing. Without human protection, the trade routes were becoming death traps. Sujin had saluted him with respect and walked away. Orders were orders. And her orders were clear. Come home. Across the galaxy, the same scene repeated itself 1,000 times. Human ships left their posts. Human soldiers packed their bags. Human doctors closed their clinics. Human teachers left their schools. Everything humanity had built beyond their borders was being abandoned. On the colony world of New Bizin, an engineer named Hana Beek sat in her small apartment and watched the news with her family. Her father, Minho, sat in his old chair by the window. He was 70 years old, and his left arm was mechanical, a replacement for the one he lost in the border wars 30 years ago. The Congress has issued another statement, the news anchor said. They are calling for calm and asking humanity to return to negotiations. Hannah's mother made a sound of disgust. Now they want to negotiate, after they voted to put us in chains. Quiet, Minho said softly. Let me hear. The news showed images of alien worlds in chaos. Velith cities had riots as people demanded their government fix the crisis. Moran shipping companies were going bankrupt because their cargo kept getting stolen. The small species, the ones who had always depended on human protection, were the hardest hit. Some were already facing starvation as supply lines collapsed. They deserve it, Hana's younger brother muttered. Let them suffer. Minho turned his head slowly. No one deserves to starve, boy. Remember that. But they voted against us. They called us dangerous. Yes, they did. Minho looked back at the window. And they were right. We are dangerous. We are the most dangerous species this galaxy has ever seen. That is why they fear us. That is why they always feared us. He paused. The question is not whether we are dangerous. The question is what we do with that danger. Do we use it to protect? Or do we use it to punish? No one had an answer. In the command center of Human Strategic Command, Councilor Taiwan Shin reviewed the withdrawal reports. He was a thin man with tired eyes and gray hair that had once been black. He had served in the military for 40 years before moving to strategic planning. He knew war. He knew peace. And he knew that what was happening now was neither. The last patrol ships have crossed back into human space, his aide reported. All borders are now sealed. Communication blackout is complete. Taiwan nodded. And the technology? Recovered or destroyed. Nothing useful remains in alien hands. This had been the hardest part. For 200 years, humans had shared their knowledge freely. Medical technology, agricultural techniques, engineering advances. Now it was all being taken back. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. If the galaxy wanted humans contained, then they would have to do without human knowledge too. Sir, another aide spoke up. We are receiving a communication request from the Velith High Chancellor. This is his 43rd attempt this week. Same answer as before. Automated response only. Yes, sir. Also, we have reports of increased Keth marauder activity along the former patrol routes. 3 Myram merchant convoys have been destroyed in the last week alone. Taiwan closed his eyes briefly. He did not enjoy this. He took no pleasure in watching innocent people suffer because their leaders made foolish choices. But he also remembered the vote. 9-3. He remembered the words of the Moran delegate. A wise person keeps a knife locked away. That is no longer our concern, he said quietly. Continue the withdrawal. On the Hanuel, Captain Sujin sat alone in her quarters. She was looking at a photograph on her desk. It showed her standing with Station Keeper Morval at a celebration 5 years ago. The Fenari had just promoted her to honorary citizen of his station. She still had the medal somewhere. Her door chimed. Come in. Her first officer, a young man named Hyungu Jeng, entered. He looked troubled. "Captain, I need to ask you something." "Ask. Are we doing the right thing? Leaving them like this?" Sujin was quiet for a long moment. "I have served the fleet for 30 years. I have protected alien worlds. I have saved alien lives. I have lost friends doing it." She touched the photograph gently. "And they voted to put us in a cage, after everything we gave them. But the common people did not vote. They are suffering because their leaders were fools. Yes." Sujin stood and walked to her window. "And that is the tragedy of it. The innocent always suffer for the sins of the powerful. But we cannot force people to accept our help. We cannot force them to see us as friends instead of threats." She turned to face him. "We offered them our hands for 200 years. They slapped those hands away. Now they must learn what life is like without us. And if they die, then they die." Her voice was hard, but her eyes were not. "We are not gods, Hyunwoo. We cannot save people from themselves." The next morning, a message arrived at Covenant Prime. It came from the edge of known space, from monitoring stations that had been silent for 50 years. The swarm had been detected. The High Chancellor read the report 3 times, hoping he had misunderstood. He had not. The swarm, the ancient enemy that had nearly destroyed the galaxy, was coming back. Millions of ships, billions of creatures, an endless hunger that consumed everything in its path. The last time the swarm came, humanity had stalked them. 3 billion humans dead, but the swarm was beaten back. Now humanity was gone. Their ships were behind sealed borders. Their soldiers were home with their families. Their weapons were locked away. The High Chancellor sent another message to humanity. Then another. Then another. There was no reply. Outside his window, the stars continued to shine, cold and indifferent. But somewhere in the darkness between them, the swarm was moving closer. And this time, no one was standing in its way. The galaxy had told humanity they were dangerous. Now the galaxy would learn what true danger looked like. And it was coming fast. The emergency session of the United Stellar Congress was the largest gathering in galactic history. Every species sent their leaders, their generals, their scientists. The great hall that had seemed so grand before now felt small and crowded. Fear filled the air like smoke. High Chancellor Varric stood at his podium, but he no longer looked confident. His pale blue skin had turned almost gray. His hands trembled slightly as he held his reports. "The swarm has consumed the outer colonies of Phanar Prime and Keth 7, he announced. "Total casualties are estimated at 12 million. Our combined fleets engaged the enemy at the Mirax corridor. We lost 60% of our ships in the first hour." Gasps echoed through the hall. Delegates whispered to each other with wide, frightened eyes. "The swarm is larger than our historical records indicated. Our weapons are less effective than we believed. They will reach the inner territories within 3 months at their current speed." A Miran general stood up. "What about the humans? Have they responded to our calls for help?" The silence that followed was its own answer. "We have sent 47 official requests for assistance," Varric admitted. "We have received only automated responses. The human government refuses to speak with us." "Then we are doomed," someone said from the back. No one disagreed. Deep within human space, Admiral Una Park watched the same reports from her command center. Her face showed no emotion as the numbers scrolled across her screen. 60% losses. 12 million dead. Inner territories threatened. "Admiral," her aide said quietly, "we are receiving another request from the Congress. The Veloth High Chancellor is personally asking to speak with you." "No, ma'am. With respect, they are dying out there." Una turned to look at her young aide. "I am aware. I have studied the battle reports. Their tactics were foolish. Their coordination was poor, and their weapons were outdated. They had 200 years to prepare for this day while we protected them. They spent that time getting soft. She turned back to her screens. This is the consequence of their choices. The aide said nothing more. On Earth, in the great archives of the Human Historical Society, a woman named Mireille Nam was working late. She was a historian, small and quiet, with glasses that were always sliding down her nose. For 30 years, she had studied the First Swarm War. She knew every battle, every sacrifice, every name on the memorial walls. Tonight, she was preparing a release. The government had finally declassified the true records of the war. The galaxy had been told a simple story. Humans fought the swarm and won. But the truth was much more complicated, much more painful. Mireille pressed the button to send the files to every human news network. Within hours, the galaxy finally learned the real cost of their survival. The First Swarm War had lasted 40 years. Not 30, as the official records claimed. The extra 10 years have been spent fighting alone, after the other species retreated behind their borders and left humanity to die. 3 billion humans had been lost. Not soldiers only, but civilians too. Entire colonies had been sacrificed to slow the swarm's advance. Children had been evacuated on ships that never arrived. Families had been torn apart across the stars. The records showed images that had never been released before. Human soldiers fighting in the ruins of burned worlds. Human medics working until they collapsed from exhaustion. Human commanders making impossible choices, deciding which planets to save and which to abandon. Human children growing up in war, knowing nothing else. And through all of it, through every horror and every sacrifice, the other species of the galaxy had watched from safety. They had sent messages of support. They had offered prayers and good wishes. But they had not sent ships. They had not sent soldiers. They had not lifted a single finger to help. When the war ended, when the swarm was finally driven back, those same species had emerged from their hiding places to celebrate. They had built monuments to peace. They had written songs about hope. They had thanked the humans politely and then slowly, quietly, begun to fear them. Because they had seen what humans could do when pushed to the edge. They had seen the terrible strength that lived inside these soft, short-lived creatures. And that strength frightened them more than the swarm ever had. So they had voted for the containment protocol. They had decided to lock the knife away. Admiral Yuna received a message from the Torith ambassador, one of the 3 species who had voted with humanity. The Torith were warriors. They understood honor better than most. Admiral Park, the message read, I have spoken with the human government on behalf of my people. I asked if you would help us fight the swarm. I was given a message to deliver to you personally. Yuna opened the attached file. It contained a single sentence. They said they will watch. Like you watched them. The Torith ambassador had added her own note at the bottom. I cannot blame them. May our ancestors forgive us all. Back at Covenant Prime, the evacuation had begun. Ships were leaving every hour, carrying the wealthy and powerful to safer regions. The common people were left behind to wait and hope. High Chancellor Varek sat alone in his office. His grand plans had crumbled. His political allies had abandoned him. His people were dying, and it was his fault. He had been so certain that containing humanity was the right choice. So certain that their strength was a threat that needed to be controlled. Now he understood the truth. Human strength had never been the threat. Human absence was the threat. Human protection had been the only thing standing between the galaxy and the darkness. And he had thrown that protection away. He wrote one final message to the human government. It was not official. It was not political. It was simply the truth. I was wrong. We were all wrong. We feared your strength because we did not understand it. You were strong because you chose to protect others, not because you wanted power. You were strong because you sacrificed for strangers. We should have seen that. We should have honored that. Instead, we tried to chain you like animals. I am sorry. I am so deeply sorry. If there is any mercy in your hearts, please help us. Not because we deserve it. We do not. Help us because that is who you are. That is who you have always been. He sent the message and waited. There was no reply. Outside his window, the first swarm ships appeared in the sky. They were distant still, just small points of light among the stars. But they were growing closer, growing larger, growing hungry. And the galaxy that had rejected its protectors now faced the darkness alone. President Junho Rule had not slept in 3 days. The weight of a decision pressed down on his shoulders, heavier than any burden he had ever carried. He was 62 years old, a former teacher who had entered politics to make things better. Now he sat in a room where every choice meant either betraying his people's dignity or letting billions of strangers die. The council chamber was full. Generals, admirals, politicians, advisors. The most powerful humans in the galaxy sat around a long table, waiting for him to speak. General Yoonji Moon broke the silence first. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and scars on her hands from battles she never talked about. Her voice was firm but not angry. The facts are simple. The swarm has destroyed 47 worlds. Casualties are now over 200 million and rising. The alien fleets have been crushed. Covenant Prime will fall within 2 weeks. She pulled up a projection showing the galaxy map. Red dots showed swarm positions. They were everywhere. If we do not intervene, estimates suggest total alien casualties will reach 3 billion before the swarm runs out of targets. 3 billion, someone whispered. The same number we lost in the first war. Yes, Yoonji nodded slowly. The same number. And then the swarm will turn its attention to human space. They have not forgotten us. They have been waiting for this moment. Growing stronger. Getting ready. President Junho spoke quietly. You believe we should fight. I believe we have no choice. If we wait until they finish with the aliens, we will face a swarm twice as large and twice as experienced. Fighting now, alongside whatever remains of the alien forces, gives us the best chance of survival. So this is about survival, not about saving them. Yoonji hesitated. It can be both, sir. From the corner of the room, an old man stood. Elder Sang-woo Han had been president 30 years ago. He had guided humanity through the Void Incursion. His white hair and lined face showed his age, but his eyes were still sharp. May I speak? Junho nodded. Sang-woo walked slowly to the center of the room. His voice was quiet but carried to every ear. I remember the vote. 9-3. I remember the words of the Velith Chancellor, calling us a threat to be contained. I remember the Moran delegate comparing us to knives that should be locked away. He paused. I also remember the first swarm war. I was a young soldier then. I watched my friends burn in the void. I held my brother as he died on a planet whose name I cannot speak without weeping. He turned to face the council. We gave them everything. We asked for nothing. And they spat on us. They told the galaxy that human strength was something to fear. They built a cage for us while we were still bleeding from the wounds we are in protecting them. His voice grew harder. Tell me, General, why should we save them now? Why should we spend more human lives for people who hate us? The room was silent. A young voice spoke from near the door. Lieutenant Boyang Cha was 24 years old, the youngest person in the room. She had been brought as an aide, expected to stay quiet. But she could not stay quiet any longer. Permission to speak, sir. President Junho looked at her with surprise. Granted. Boyang stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly. My grandmother served in the First Swarm War. She was a pilot. She flew missions that had no chance of return. She died at the Battle of Huron's Gate, buying time for evacuation ships to escape. She swallowed hard. I grew up hearing stories about her. Not stories of glory or victory. Stories of choice. She chose to fly that mission. She chose to die for strangers. Your point? Sanwu asked, not unkindly. My grandmother did not die for the Velith. She did not die for the Moran. She died because people were in danger and she could help. She died because that was who she was. Moyang looked around the room. We are angry. We have every right to be angry. They treated us like monsters. They tried to chain us. But if we let them die because of our anger, what does that make us? No one answered. It makes us exactly what they feared. Dangerous, cruel, unworthy of trust. Her voice grew stronger. My grandmother was not dangerous because she had weapons. She was dangerous because she had courage. She was dangerous because she would not look away from suffering, even when it cost her everything. Is that not who we are? Is that not who we have always been? The silence stretched. President Junho stood and walked to the window. Outside, the stars shone cold and distant. Somewhere out there, billions of beings were dying, screaming, praying for help that might never come. When I was young, he said softly, my mother told me a story. A man was walking home when he saw his enemy drowning in a river. The man had every reason to walk past. His enemy had hurt him, insulted him, tried to destroy him. But the man jumped in and saved him anyway. He turned to face the room. I asked my mother why. She said, because who you are in that moment defines who you will be forever. He walked slowly to a door at the side of the chamber. It led to a memorial room, a place of quiet and remembrance. The others followed. The walls were covered with names. Millions of names. Every human who had died defending others. Soldiers, doctors, engineers, teachers, children who had been too young to understand why they were dying. Their names stretched from floor to ceiling, too many to count, too many to comprehend. Junho stood before the wall and bowed his head. They died for a galaxy that did not deserve them, he said. They died for species who would one day call them dangerous. They died for strangers who would forget their sacrifice. He touched one of the names gently. If we walk away now, if we let the galaxy burn because our pride was wounded, then these names mean nothing. These deaths mean nothing. Everything we have ever been means nothing. He turned to face his council. We are going to save them, not because they deserve it. They do not. We are going to save them because my mother was right. Who we are in this moment will define who we are forever. His voice hardened. But this time, they will understand the cost. They will know what we sacrifice for them. And they will never forget again. Within the hour, the order went out. Human ships began to move. Human soldiers reported to their stations. Human weapons came online. A single message broadcast across every channel in the galaxy. The Human Federation fleet has mobilized. We are coming. Not because you deserve it. Because we remember who we are. And somewhere in the darkness, the swarm felt something it had not felt in 50 years. Fear. The sky above Covenant Prime was dark with swarm ships. Millions of them, blocking out the stars, casting shadows across the dying world below. The last alien defenders had retreated to the station's shields, waiting for an end that seemed certain. High Chancellor Varric stood at the observation window, watching his doom approach. And then the stars tore open. Hyperspace gates activated in a perfect ring around the planet. Light exploded across the darkness as ship after ship emerged. Human warships. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. The largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history poured from the gates like a river of steel and fire. At the center of the formation, the flagship Sovereignty led the advance. Admiral Una Park stood on its bridge, her gray uniform pressed, her eyes sharp. "All vessels, this is Admiral Park." Her voice carried across every human ship. "We did not come back for their gratitude. We came back because the darkness does not care who voted for what." Battle stations. The human fleet moved as one. Centuries of combat experience guided every maneuver. Ships fell into formations that the swarm had never seen, positions that created overlapping fields of fire, patterns designed by admirals who had spent their lives studying this enemy. Captain Sujin Choi commanded the vanguard from her ship, the Hanyul. Her vessel led 50 fast attack cruisers toward the swarm's heart. "Captain," her first officer Hyunwoo said, "the swarm command entity has been located. It is at the center of their formation, coordinating their movements." Sujin nodded slowly. She had known this moment would come. The command entity was the swarm's brain, a massive living ship that controlled millions of lesser creatures through thought alone. Destroy it, and the swarm would fall into chaos. But reaching it meant flying through the densest part of the enemy formation. It meant certain death. Set course for the command entity. Maximum speed. "Captain, the odds of survival are less than 2%. "I know." Sujin thought of Station Keeper Morval, the Fenari who had begged her to stay. She thought of the photograph on her desk. She thought of all the years she had spent protecting people who did not even know her name. Some things are worth more than survival. The Hanyul accelerated into the storm. The battle that followed would become legend. Human ships fought with precision and fury that the galaxy had never witnessed. Weapons that had been kept secret for generations were finally revealed. Tactics that had been developed in simulation were now tested in blood and fire. Admiral Una directed the battle like a conductor leading a symphony of destruction. She saw patterns in the chaos, opportunities in the carnage. Her orders came fast and clear, moving ships into position, concentrating fire where it would do the most damage. "Focus fire on Sector 7. Draw their attention away from the Hanyul. Second Fleet, advance and secure the evacuation corridor. Medical ships, move in behind our lines. Rescue any alien vessels that can be saved." The alien defenders watched in disbelief. Ships that they had considered unstoppable fell before human weapons. Formations that had crushed their fleets broke apart under human pressure. For the first time in months, hope began to flicker in their hearts. Deep in the swarm formation, the Hanyul was dying. Hull breaches had opened across its surface. Fires burned in its corridors. Half its crew was already gone. But it kept moving forward, kept fighting, kept pushing toward the command entity. "Engine 3 is down," Hyunwoo reported. "Shields at 12%. Forward weapons are offline." Sujin gripped her command chair. The command entity was close now, a massive pulsing thing that looked like a tumor growing between the stars. "Transfer all remaining power to engines." "Ran it. Captain, that is an order." The Hanyul's final survivors evacuated to escape pods. Sujin stayed in her post. The ship accelerated one last time, its broken hull screaming through the void, its captain standing tall at its helm. "This is Captain Sujin Choi of the Human Federation vessel Hanyul." She broadcast on all channels. "To my crew, it has been an honor. To my enemies, we will meet again in the next life. To the galaxy," she smiled slightly, "you are welcome." The Hanyul struck the command entity at full speed. The explosion was visible from Covenant Prime, and the swarm went mad. Without their coordination, the creatures turned on each other. Ships collided. Formations collapsed. The perfect machine became a chaos of confused, terrified animals. The human fleet pressed its advantage, cutting through the disorganized enemy with methodical precision. Within hours, it was over. The swarm broke. Survivors scattered to the dark spaces between galaxies, fleeing the humans who had hurt them so badly twice. The skies above Covenant Prime cleared. Stars shone again, cold and bright and free. 3 days later, Ambassador Dong Kang walked back into the Congress chamber. He was wearing his military dress uniform now, the medals on his chest telling stories of service and sacrifice that most of the delegates could not imagine. He walked slowly to the human section, to the seat he had left 6 months before. His translator pen was still sitting on the table where he had placed it. No one had touched it. The hall was completely silent. Delegates who had voted for the containment protocol could not meet his eyes. Those who had supported humanity looked at him with something like awe. The empty seats where species had once sat, species who had been consumed by the swarm, served as silent testimony to the cost of fear. Doham picked up his pen and held it in his hand. He studied it for a long moment. "We did not come back for apologies," he said, his voice filling the hall. "We did not come back for thanks. We came back because someone had to. That is who we are. That is who we have always been." He looked around the room, meeting every eye that dared to meet his. "The question was never whether we would save you. We will always save you. That is our burden and our honor. The question is whether you will finally understand why." He placed a document on the table. "This is a proposal for the dissolution of the containment protocol. It also establishes the human protectorate. We will guard the galaxy. We will patrol the borders. We will stand between you and the darkness. But we will do it on our terms. Not as servants. Not as threats. As equals." No one spoke. No one moved. "The vote is open." One by one, the delegates raised their hands. Every single one. Unanimous. Dawn allowed himself a small nod. "Then we are agreed." 1 year later, Admiral Una Park stood on the bridge of her new flagship, the Sujin, named for the captain who had given everything. Through the main window, she watched human and alien ships patrol together, their formations mixed, their purposes aligned. Her aide, a young officer named Minjae, stood beside her. "Admiral, do you think they have really changed?" Una considered the question. She thought of High Chancellor Varric, who had resigned in shame. She thought of the new leaders who had risen, ones who had seen the cost of fear. She thought of the alien children who now played beside human children on shared stations, growing up together, learning together. "No," she said finally. "They have not changed. They are still afraid of us. They will always be afraid of us. That is the nature of the weak looking upon the strong." She paused. "But we have changed. We stopped asking permission to be who we are. We stopped waiting for their acceptance. We decided that our worth does not depend on their opinion." She turned from the window. "And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps being ourselves fully and without apology will teach them more than words ever could. Perhaps watching us sacrifice for them again and again will finally show them that strength is not something to fear." A small smile crossed her face. "Or perhaps it will not. Either way, we will continue to be who we are." The stars stretched endlessly before them, bright and beautiful and full of danger. But humanity walked among them now, not as servants, not as saviors, not as threats, simply as themselves. And that was enough. That had always been enough. They just had to remember it. Finally, they had.